Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Outerview. My name is Professor Les Henry, and this is where reason comes first. And it is an absolute pleasure for me to welcome today one of my oldest friends. We've known each other from we were around 17 when we used to play table football up on Compton Street. The one and only Junior Giscombe. Brother Junior, how you doing?
Boy, I'm telling you, Les, it's an absolute pleasure being able to do this with you. Just so people actually know a bit about me. At 24, I made a record called Mama Used to Say that took me all around the world. So for about 10 years in my life, I spent traveling most of the time all around the place, learning different cultures, different people to meet, different attitudes, different ways. And I kept doing it. I just loved it. Mama became a big hit. I went on to do Beverly Hill Cop and sold over 70 million albums with that album, plus winning a Grammy for that album as well with everybody else, I must admit. And I just continued. I wrote for different artists, including Maxi Priest, including Ruby Turner, including the Tramps, right? Worked with Stevie Wonder, worked with Arif Mardin, worked with Stuart. Easy. Hey! Yeah, right. So my career had gone from being part of a scene in England to being part of this larger scene. And what I found, especially at that time, which would have been about 82, 83, what I found at that time was because I was the first Black artist to do Soul Train, the first English artist, should I say, born and bred in England, to do Soul Train and to do a few TV programs in America, which Solid Gold and things like this, and opened up that door for a lot more British artists to come through.
Absolutely.
You know, so that pretty much did me.
Yeah. And sorry to cut you, but that's one of the things I always say. You know, you hear about loose ends and you hear about soul to soul. And we always say to them, but Junior, he opened those doors for you.
Before me, there was nobody who was born British that had had any major success in America. No. In terms of the kind of music that we were making. So that whole time it just exploded. It just became huge, and the Americans just really took me to their heart. You know, it wasn't a thing whereby like today you have to be promoted, marketed, and whatever else. The beauty with Mama Used to Say was that the record company in America didn't even want to put it out. It was the people on the street who were buying it in their droves. And that made the record company have to stand up. They spent no money because they didn't need to. The record was becoming that big. It was the first record ever on American radio where they would play the English version and the American version back to back. Okay. And it just exploded. It just became this iconic song for so many people in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so that was really a real big eye opener for me about how I started to view the world. Yeah. And how I started to view England, how I started to view America, Germany, Japan, all of these different countries where I'd been taught at school to view it in a particular way. I left school and in doing Black history at college, started to fully understand who I was. My mother was a Garveyite. Her aunt used to take her to Marcus Garvey meetings.
Oh, wow.
And right back in Jamaica. So my mom was very much aware of who she was, where she was coming from, and imparted that on us as children, because I'm the youngest of 7. So that kind of, again, made me pretty much hardened to things that was going on. Yeah. And looking at things that was going on, recognizing the injustices, the inequalities, we weren't the same as. And that was pretty much where, in terms of my youth, when I was young, I was shaped that way. I used to go to meetings. You remember Oval House?
Oval House.
Just round the corner from Oval Station, back in the day. But they used to have these things, Les, where you used to go down there and they would show you films of Farrakhan and show you films of Malcolm X.
Vaguely.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right back them days, man, right? And I used to go with my sisters and we would go and the police would come and they would mash down the place and try and stop us from actually being able to do the things that we wanted to do, hear what was happening and stuff. So my mindset from, I would say from around about 13, 14 was incredibly pro-Black, you know, because I knew myself. So I'd not take certain lessons in school. I'd not understood. I wouldn't do history. I love history, but I wouldn't do white history in terms of its interpretation of who we were. You know, I started out with teaching me about the Industrial Revolution, but I couldn't get it because I couldn't understand how you started with the Industrial Revolution and were telling me names of various people who had done these wonderful things, but you wouldn't speak about the atrocities that had taken place. And not, you know what I'm saying, and not just from slavery, because it would seem to me that we tend to feel that our history is slavery, when our history is the beginning of mankind. So I kind of couldn't get with it and would be too much of a challenge for the teachers. So I'd always be sent out less. If I did 10 minutes in the class and they started to tell me about the various ways that they used to get sugarcane, for instance, and the mills that they used and stuff. My mother had been telling me about the little children that they were using and how sometimes their hands would get stuck and they would cut off the hands so that the mill didn't stop. I couldn't.
What's really interesting about that? I just had the same conversation with Dr. Carlton Brown, Brother Carlton, who I know you know. Same conversation. But for me, what is really interesting about this is I know you've got particular views, and we've reasoned over the years, but I know you've got particular views on why is it that there's an emphasis and why are we always taught to empathize with what happened to Jews during the Holocaust, yet our histories remain invisible. So maybe your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that went back to the fact that, like, we were taught to empathize. It wasn't something that you felt, right, in terms of what the Jews had gone through. My understanding of the Jews were that they were Hebrews and that they came from Africa. These Jews were European, based really coming from Russia and the Zionists. And, you know, taking on board the fact that after, 1947, when Britain and France held by mandate Palestine, and because of the money that the Jews had actually given to the fight in the war, were, if you like, told that they would get this piece of land. They would be able to, this is yours, we're going to give you this. And then to continue to project this Jewism and what took place during the war, the fact that, like, we are always supposed to remember the Holocaust. But if I mention the fact of just going into a part of our history, which was slavery, everybody seemed to poo-poo it. Nobody wanted to speak about it. Nobody wanted to say what it was. Nobody wanted to put across to me an understanding of why this thing was being pushed underneath the carpet. Why was it that every time that you raised your head about what was an atrocity over 300-400 years now, right, that we've had to live with this, that nobody wanted to talk about it? But the Holocaust, if you had a football team, I think the England team went down to Germany, or I'm not sure if it was Germany or another part, but they went to Auschwitz, and they were told to go to Auschwitz because they were told that you should understand this atrocity that took place. I never saw the English team go to Jamaica or any part of Africa, or even go to Ghana and go down and see where the slave trade took place and how these people were kept and how these people were then shipped out, how these people were then kicked off boats and pushed off boats. And as I said, because my mother was a pupil then, let's say, of Marcus Garvey, these were things that my mother would tell me, but I would poo-poo myself because of the fact I had been infiltrated mentally into not seeing ourselves, but seeing that we had to be a part of them. I had to take on their perspective. A bit like when you go to school, right? And they turn around and you have the careers officer list. And he turns and he says to you, right, you say, what do you want to be? And you say, like, I want to be a doctor. And he smiles and he says, you know, I've got this little application form here. Why don't you put down you want to be a mechanic? Why don't you put down you want to be a plumber? Why don't you put down?
Absolutely. And again,
so
recurring theme.
Exactly.
Reasonings, because, you know, and it's like what Malcolm X said, I want to be this. No, be a carpenter. Jesus was a carpenter. When I was
Thank you.
And I've written about this, they used to say to me, oh, Henry, you're too thick to do a thinking man's job. Go and work down a big cream biscuit factory, or go and labour on a building site. But on your point about the Holocaust, and I know it's a thorny issue for many people, but when I used to teach at Goldsmiths College, because one of the courses I taught, I believe it was first designed by Prof Paul Gilroy, and when he left and went to the States, I took it over and added little bits to it. But one of the aspects of this course, it was called something like Race and Representation in Social Theory or something. I can't remember what it was.
Right.
But it had the Holocaust in there. And one day I was in the library at Goldsmiths and I found this book, and it was edited by Professor something Rosenbaum. Head not really good to hear. But the book was called, Was the Holocaust Unique? Now, what this guy did in this book, and this is a Jewish professor, and I'll give you the context very quickly because the onus is on you. But basically,
no, please.
In this book, he invited like 12, let's say 12 different scholars, so it's an anthology, to speak about Holocausts. One of them was about chattel enslavement, what happened to us.
Right.
One guy wrote about what happened to the gypsies, the so-called gypsies, who, because of their living beyond the society status, no one has a clue how many of them were killed. They don't even know what. They knew that the Nazis would see them on the road and slaughter them and leave them on the roadside.
Right.
So this book, this anthology, compared all of these things. And I remember one year, I think, in fact, it was the last year when I was there, 2005 academic year. One of my colleagues marked down loads of my students. And when I said, why are you marking down my students? It was because they weren't familiar with that source. They were not familiar with that. So they only had this regular, very public notion of the Shoah, because that's what the Jewish communities called it.
Jewish communities was, yeah.
And he didn't have that understanding. And I said to him, you need to get into the library and read that book. Because you're not going to mark down my students because they don't just invest in this notion. Because human suffering, we cannot put human suffering on a scale. It doesn't work like that.
Agreed.
I remember once I saw a very interesting documentary with Dr. Khalid Mohammed. And he was in a reasoning with Donahue. And a sister said, the Holocaust is the worst atrocity on film.
Now she's got it right.
And that's what it is. So what I basically said to my students is, what happened to us during chattel enslavement? What happened to the Jews during the Holocaust? What happened to the people during Bosnia and Serbia? All of these things are Holocausts.
Agreed.
So what we need to then ask the question is, why are some celebrated, not celebrated, but commemorated in the wider public arena? And why some aren't? And the question for me is, as Africans, is it because we're supposed to be historically amnesic?
It's a great question, because you see, I come from that kind of mindset. What is it?
Garvey. That's a Garvey proposition.
Thank you. What is it? Well, I'd speaking with my Jewish friends, and we were talking about the Holocaust. And I was saying that it was a terrible thing, what took place, right, with the Nazis and what the Nazis did. But I turned and I ended by saying to them, but you know your last name.
Absolutely.
So they said to me, what do you mean by that? I said, I don't know my last name, right? I've been given a name. Yeah. And that name has gone down through generations.
Absolutely.
So none of us truly know, even if I go back and it's going through the whole thing of like DNA and going back to find out what is what, it always ends up with Giscombe, right? So I'm saying that the atrocity that happened to you, I fully grasp and I fully can understand. Yeah. But when I realized that that mine You want me to shut up and stay in my little corner
Yeah.
and continue to empathize. So you are whitewashing my mind into perceiving things from your perspective.
Yeah.
But if I chose to put forward things that I didn't understand, that I figured that you may understand, it was always poo-pooed, it was always pushed to the left, it was always pushed to the side.
That's why I got expelled from school, as well as fighting, because I like fighting, you know. But it
Yeah.
wasn't just that, because I was studying African history and Shotokan karate at Moonshot. You know, always
Right, I remember.
history for the mind, Shotokan, because we were being attacked by white men.
We were being attacked all the time. Come on.
Boys, but we were being attacked by men. So we had to learn
Agreed.
to handle ourselves. When people say to me about slavery, or they're comparing it to like the Holocaust or whatever, I say to them, we are the only members of the human family who were reduced to 3/5 of a human being.
Agreed.
So under the American Constitution, or whatever the hell they want to call it, we were free under the American amendments, or whatever it is, you know, people can look into that. We were 3/5 part human. But for me, what is really interesting, and you know, when you say to your, when you said to your Jewish friends, you don't know your last names, this is what the guy argued in that book in the context of being a so-called gypsy.
Right.
Because they lived beyond the society. So no one has a clue how many of them died. And in that book, he actually maps how he had to argue, him and some other people had to argue and then finally get their story included in the famous Holocaust Museum that's in America. In
America.
If it is. They had to argue to get their own stories in there. And this is why when I say to people, we can speak in the context of being Africans, and why this story is recognized within the wider public arena and ours aren't. But then there are other communities as well. So sometimes when I'm making these arguments, the African argument is it's us, we feel it, it's visceral. But what I'll say to them is there are other people who share that invisibility. And is that right?
Well, that's why I'm saying when I'm saying about the empathizing with, it's because, you get what I'm saying? Because there are so many different stories. Just dealing with Britain, there is a story with the way that they dealt with India, for instance, as you and I would know. The breaking up of India over a period of what, days? 20 odd days. You could rewrite the map of India to give Pakistan the worst atrocities that took place at that time in the world in terms of the massacres that was going on between these two people because of what you, the British, have done. You never taught that in school. It was, as I said, these things were things that were making me have to stop, look at myself, look at the person that was speaking to me. You remember, Les, it was cool to turn around and tell you was a nigger, or you was a this, or you was a black this, you was a wog. All of these derogatory words. No, but you get what I'm saying? All of these derogatory words. How you doing, sunshine? And rubbing your head, right? All of these derogatory things, it was fine, right, during those early 60s, right, mid 60s, to do these things. Going into the 70s, where the white van man, if you couldn't handle yourself, the white van man would come along and jump out 4 or 5 men, and you'd be running. Right? These are stories which you and I could tell that went on for years for us. If we didn't learn to fight, if we didn't learn to speak, if we weren't articulate enough to put across our points, we would be poo-pooed. And if we were articulate enough to put across these points, right, and have a view on the Holocaust outside of their view, you would be taken out of a class. You could almost you would go into the headmaster, who would be making you know that there is no way that you can take that class, or you can be in that class and have those views. It's the same with Christianity and Christ. When I turned and I said to my mother, who had a picture up of Jesus Christ on her wall, and he was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and I turned and I said to her, I must have been about 6, but I never forgot it. And I turned and I said, how is it possible that this man that you have on the wall, right, is blonde with blue eyes, mummy, and we know that he comes from Africa. And my mother, who, again, as I say, the whitewashing, turned and said, see beyond the color. Now, that took me years, Les, years, because I kept saying because you keep saying to yourself, if the color wasn't important, why did they paint him? Do you get what I'm saying? Why did they paint him that way?
Right, so Brother Junior, with all that aside, what is a surprising thing you can tell us? What is a surprising thing about Junior Giscombe?
I would say that not many people know that, like, during the period of apartheid, that the money that I made during that period of time, the money that was being made from my records, I put 4 young single mothers through school and university here in the UK. And all 4 of them passed and got a first in whatever their chosen thing was. It was something that for me was just,
so what
I'd
year
gone
are
on
we
the
talking
marches.
about now? What year are we? When are we talking?
Well, when are we talking? We're talking early 80s. We're talking around about 82, 83. I'd go on the marches, Les, right? And again, you know, the whole thing, people would talk about Mandela. I'd be talking about Stephen Biko, right? Because to me, he was the true warrior. He was the true, for me.
And people like that, absolutely.
Those were the people for me. You know, when everybody talked about Nelson, and no disrespect to Nelson, but I wasn't there. It was a bit like when everybody talked about Martin Luther King. I wasn't there. I'd be more with, you know, with Malcolm than I would be with Martin. I was more Stephen than I would be Nelson. The true fighters, young, hungry to develop their minds, true and hungry to develop younger people's minds by seeing things, not going out there and saying, I want to kill this man and kill that man, but understanding.
Yeah,
get what I'm saying? Fully understanding. So when I first started getting my checks in from South Africa, I'd go to my mum and I'd say to her that, like, I've just been paid X amount from South Africa and stuff. And my mother would always say, so what are you going to do? Right? Normally you say, like, I'm going to bank it. But I have to check this, right? And I was like, I need to do something that makes sense from all of this for me. Yeah. So I was approached by my manager's sister, who they came from Ghana. And she sat down and she had this project that she wanted to do, which was to help young women go through college, go through university. But obviously they would need money to be able to finance it because they've got young children, being able to have babysitters and stuff like this. So I chose to use all that money to put those girls through. But it wasn't the money. The beautiful thing was to see these young women pass, to see these young women excel. That was the beauty of it.
I don't know what's happened to any of them now.
I'm not sure, you know, to be quite honest with you, which is a shame because I wish I'd kept in contact. But
maybe
again,
through this, you never know.
Very true. Maybe through this, they may be watching. True.
That is the blessing, because at the end of the day, how many people, look, I don't even want to get into musicians who are, because trust me, that's a different conversation. But
we know,
you know, to have that kind of consciousness at that time and at that age, you know, to me, it's commendable.
Thank you, man.
Absolutely. Because only people can talk, but you know, you did it, and it would only be people who know you intimately would even know that you did it, because you don't make a big, literally song and dance about it. You just do it because it feels right. So the other thing I want is, what can people take away? What has Junior Giscombe got to give people to take away from this, to think over?
I think when it comes to thinking over, what is there Junior Giscombe wants to leave you to think over? I think I need to leave you with the fact, take on board first and foremost that we're dealing with human beings, first and foremost. Take on board that never allow yourself to be taken on board as a fool because of the color of your skin. Don't ever turn around and give up on your dream, on where you want to pursue yourself, where you see yourself, right? I think if you're going to take anything away from what we've just had here today, Les, I would say this was a union of two minds that go back to when they were two little oranges, right? And you just had juice it, right? and we were 2 little oranges, just a juice it. We were out there, we were trying, we had our minds knowing, to be honest, not saying we knew exactly where we wanted to go.
Yeah.
But we knew, Les, back then, we knew when we were playing that football game, we knew the inequalities, we knew what we had to do. We were trying to change, right, things. And if anything, I would say, I'm not going to use Black Lives Matters, because that narrative, to me, if I'm going to use it, has to be for the real thing. It does matter. And understand not just mine and not just yours, but ours as a people matters. And if what we're seeing with white youngsters and Asian youngsters fully grasping the fact that Black lives matter, no, don't give me the narrative that all lives matter. We don't know that. Don't try that, right? Fully grasp it. Because as I said, I'm going to go right back to our very beginning. If you ask me to empathize with you, and I wasn't there, then at this particular moment in time, right, you should be empathizing with me, because my advancement is your advancement.
True.
It cannot be anything else, right? We cannot advance. For me, we cannot advance under the notion that we did nothing. We cannot advance under the notion that we must continue to sit still. We cannot advance under the notion, and that whole thing has to be from a human perspective. So if Jews during the Nazi era, their lives mattered, then mine does. And if you feel to yourself that I should be appreciative of what you have done for me, you've got another thing coming. I don't appreciate it, because if I'll show you quickly, the music industry broke down and said, you know what, Black Lives Matters, and we're all going to close for a day. But the music industry took a week to come up with the fact that, like, you know, I think we should. And I'm talking the major industries, the Warner Brothers, the Sonys. They took a week, which meant that they sat down and they spoke between themselves. Should we not?
True.
How dare you? How dare you, when people like me have been making you billions of pounds? How dare you? So don't be fooled by the narrative that these people are doing it because of the fact that they believe it. They're doing it because they care. They care about green, right? They don't care about what truly is. I bet you any money, if you talk to an executive right now, he's going to tell you it will all go under the carpet, June. It's just part and parcel of the times that we're in.
Yeah.
I don't want to believe that. And I'm not going to believe that, even though I said concerning policing, I can't see the change that I want to see, because the things that are obvious are not put in place. But in terms of major change, in terms of being able to infiltrate, which I believe we need to, the mass media, not social media. Social media to me is the little boy, right? The mass media, right? The corporates. If we can infiltrate that to actually put across true values, true worth, then take that from this.
Okay. Well, it's got some. It's been a pleasure as usual, and no doubt we will catch up. Just stand strong, walk good, and keep safe. It's been
vice versa, an absolute pleasure, man.
Give thanks.
Bless.
I love that woman like no other woman. The eyeless,